On the afternoon of April 28, 1955, 14-year-old Stephanie Bryan left her school in Berkeley, California, and began her walk home as she had done many times before. The young teenager was bright, well-liked, and had no known enemies. That day, she took her usual shortcut through the Claremont Hotel's parking lot, a quiet, leafy area often frequented by neighborhood children. It was broad daylight. Nothing seemed unusual. But Stephanie never arrived home. As time passed and dinner came and went, her parents grew increasingly alarmed. They contacted the police and reported her missing. What followed was one of the most extensive missing person searches the San Francisco Bay Area had ever seen. The community, galvanized by fear and hope, came together to look for the missing girl. Hundreds of volunteers, Boy Scouts, neighbors, and police combed the surrounding areas. Bloodhounds were brought in to track her scent. Helicopters and mounted officers swept the nearby hills. Newspapers covered the case daily, fueling public concern. The city was in suspense, clinging to the hope she had simply gotten lost. Despite these efforts, the search turned up no sign of Stephanie, except one chilling clue. A schoolbook believed to belong to her was found discarded in a field. Though the book provided no real leads, it confirmed that something had happened between school and home. Then the trail went cold. Months passed with no answers. Then, on July 15, 1955, 3 months after Stephanie vanished, a breakthrough emerged, completely by accident. Georgia Abbott, the young wife of Burton W. Abbott, was in the basement of her family's Alameda home looking for a sewing machine part. In the dim corner of the room, she stumbled upon a purse. Curious, she opened it and was shocked to find an identification card bearing the name Stephanie Bryan. Terrified and confused, Georgia called the police. Within hours, law enforcement arrived and began a full search of the basement. To their shock, they found more items belonging to the missing girl, her glasses, a brassiere, and several schoolbooks. These personal effects had no reason to be in the Abbott home. The house was owned jointly by Georgia, her husband Burton, and his mother, Elsie Abbott. The family claimed to have no knowledge of how Stephanie's belongings had ended up there. Strangely, Elsie later admitted that she had seen the purse earlier but didn't make the connection to the missing girl. The discovery sparked a media firestorm. Burton Abbott, a seemingly ordinary 27-year-old student of accounting at UC Berkeley, was suddenly a prime suspect in one of California's most mysterious disappearances. Burton W. Abbott, described by those who knew him as reserved and studious, lived with his wife Georgia, their young son, and his mother Elsie in a modest home in Alameda. Abbott had battled tuberculosis in his youth, leaving him with only one functioning lung. He was not in good health, had a slender frame, and lived a largely quiet life focused on studies and family. After the shocking discovery in his basement, the media descended on the Abbott household. Burton insisted on his innocence, claiming he had no idea how the items got there. He voluntarily submitted to a lie detector test on July 19, 1955, administered by a polygraph expert, A.E. Riedel. Results of the test were never definitively published, but public suspicion was already turning against him. Abbott claimed that on the day Stephanie went missing, he had been driving to his family's remote cabin in the Trinity Mountains, nearly 300 miles away. However, the timing and details of his alibi were vague, and investigators weren't convinced. The growing suspicion led police to search the family's cabin, located in a remote part of Northern California. What they found would seal Abbott's fate. A few hundred feet from the Abbott cabin, buried in a shallow grave, authorities uncovered a badly decomposed body. Dental records confirmed the identity: it was Stephanie Bryan. The condition of her remains made it difficult to determine cause of death definitively, but investigators noted evidence of blunt force trauma to the head. The autopsy suggested she had been bludgeoned, but it was too late to determine if a sexual assault had occurred. The proximity of the body to the Abbott cabin, combined with the personal items found in their basement, created a narrative that prosecutors quickly embraced. Burton Abbott had kidnapped, possibly attempted to rape, and ultimately murdered Stephanie Bryan. On this basis, he was arrested and charged with kidnapping, rape, and first-degree murder. The case shocked California and the rest of the nation. The community demanded justice for the innocent schoolgirl. But from the very beginning, the case rested entirely on circumstantial evidence. The trial of Burton Abbott began in late 1955 in Oakland, California, and lasted for 47 days, a record-setting length at the time. It was a media spectacle, reported daily in newspapers and broadcast on radio. The prosecution's strategy relied heavily on emotional appeals. Although no direct physical evidence tied Abbott to the crime, the circumstantial chain was compelling. Stephanie's belongings in the Abbott home, her body near the Abbott cabin, and hairs and fibers from her clothing found in Abbott's car created an image of guilt that was hard to ignore. Abbott pleaded not guilty. He took the stand and testified in his own defense for 4 days, insisting he had nothing to do with the murder. His courtroom demeanor was calm, even meek. He denied knowing Stephanie, and dismissed the case as a monstrous frame-up. His legal team argued that the basement had been used as a polling place in May, giving dozens of people access. They suggested the evidence could have been planted or mistakenly left by someone else. Furthermore, Abbott's health was presented as a factor. He had only half a lung and was so frail that carrying a body or digging a grave, especially in the mountains, would have been extremely difficult. The prosecution, however, painted Abbott as a dangerous sexual deviant. They presented no witnesses to a sexual assault, but they showed the jury Stephanie's torn undergarments and played on the jury's emotional reactions. At one point, the prosecutor dramatically waved Stephanie's brassiere and panties in front of the jury box. The defense objected, but the damage had already been done. The case went to the jury, who deliberated for over 51 hours. In November 1955, they returned with a verdict, guilty of first-degree murder. Abbott was sentenced to death in California's gas chamber. As per California law, an automatic appeal was submitted to the California Supreme Court. In People v. Abbott, the court upheld the conviction in 1956, stating that although the evidence was circumstantial, it was sufficient under the law. Still, many observers remained uneasy. Legal scholars debated whether someone should be executed without direct evidence linking them to the crime. A life was at stake, and yet, there was no murder weapon, no eyewitnesses, no confession, and no forensic proof of rape. Burton's legal team, led by George T. Davis, pursued every avenue to delay or overturn the execution. They filed petitions, motions, and requests for a new trial. But each one was denied. The final date for execution was set for March 15, 1957. March 15, 1957, became one of the most chaotic and controversial days in California legal history. That morning, Davis made one last appeal to the U.S. Court of Appeals, which denied the stay. Desperate, he tried to reach Governor Goodwin J. Knight, who was at sea aboard the aircraft carrier Hancock and initially unreachable by phone. Using a television broadcast and a Navy radio relay, Davis managed to contact the governor, who granted a 1-hour stay at 9:02 a.m. Davis filed a new habeas corpus petition with the state Supreme Court, but it was denied at 10:42 a.m. Another attempt was made through the federal district court, which also rejected the appeal at 10:50 a.m. With only minutes left, Davis once again reached Governor Knight by 11:12 a.m., and the governor agreed to another stay. But it was already too late. At 11:15 a.m., Abbott was led into San Quentin's gas chamber. He was calm and collected, reportedly telling the warden, "Thank you, when wished, God bless you." The chamber was sealed, and 16 cyanide pellets were dropped into sulfuric acid. The gas began to rise. Governor Knight's staff called the warden to stop the execution. "Has it started?" they asked. "Yes," came the reply. "Can you stop it?" "No, sir. It's too late." Abbott died at 11:19 a.m. The stay that could have saved his life came 2 minutes too late. For the rest of her life, Elsie Abbott fought to clear her son's name. She called the execution legalized murder. She said Burton had been framed and spent decades collecting what she believed was new evidence. She bought newspaper ads offering rewards, begged the Alameda County grand jury to reopen the case, and even presented names of alleged witnesses she said the prosecution had silenced. Her theory pointed to her own brother, Wilbur Moore, a truck driver. She believed Moore had planted Stephanie's items in the basement and murdered the girl near the family cabin. The authorities dismissed her claims. No investigation was reopened. Elsie passed away in 2004 at the age of 100, still fully convinced of her son's innocence. After the trial and execution, Burton's wife Georgia moved away and changed her name. She took their young son Chris with her and never told him the truth about his father until he was a grown man. The shame and trauma left lasting scars on the surviving family. Georgia later died, as did Burton's brother Mark Abbott in 1968. The man Elsie suspected, Wilbur Moore, is also long deceased. The case of Burton Abbott remains one of the most haunting chapters in California's criminal justice history. It raises uncomfortable questions about the death penalty, particularly when used in cases based solely on circumstantial evidence. While many accepted Abbott's guilt at the time, growing legal and public scrutiny in later years painted a much more complex picture. Books like A Trail of Corn by Keith Walker, who spent years studying the case and interviewing the family, argue that Abbott may have been wrongfully executed. Walker himself concluded, "I don't see how he could have done it." Today, decades later, the case continues to be studied in law schools and criminal justice forums as a tragic example of how the system can fail, even in a nation built on the principle of reasonable doubt.